Welcome, dog lovers, to this week's episode of Dear Dog Fanatic. I'm your host, Kirsten, but you can call me Kay. I am a dog mom of 3, and I own a virtual dog consulting business called the Canine Detective. The stories we'll be reading today are from the r/RPGHorrorStories subreddit. Down the Reddit rabbit hole we go. And off the top, I just have to apologize if you're hearing some slurping in the background. My Frenchie decided that now is the most opportune time to have his big gulpathon. All right, he's taking some big gulps at his water dish in the corner there, so apologies if you can hear that in the background. And you might be wondering, hey, Kay, you're a virtual dog trainer. Why are you talking about TTRPGs? So the stories that we're exploring today are specifically about dogs in these systems. While you might not immediately see the relevance when it comes to training, it is always interesting reading stories about dogs or stories involving dogs and how other people treat those dogs or react to dogs. Living a life with a dog is far more than just training them. There are a lot of considerations when it comes to having a dog as part of your lifestyle. And I always like to explore different stories to see how dogs are being perceived by others and to kind of bring awareness. Some people don't understand why dogs are such a big deal, and to each their own. Not everyone on this planet needs to be a dog lover, but it is a relationship that is very important to a lot of people, and I am always excited when I can see that represented in media in some form or another. So with that, we will dive into our first story, and total disclaimer that I picked this one because this is who I am like a little bit as a player. When I play D&D, various kinds of TTRPG systems, my character always has a dog or is a dog, depending on the system. It's just something that's really important to me as a person. In order for me to play a character, there are certain fundamentals that need to be the same, and one of the big ones for me is that I love dogs. The first story has the following title, which is in quotation marks. You always pick a dog or a wolf, pick something different. And it continues. I have been playing tabletop games, mostly Pathfinder. For those that aren't aware, Pathfinder is a system, a TTRPG system like D&D is. And OP has been playing Pathfinder for about 4 or 5 years now. In that time, at least half of the characters I've made have had animal companions. With one exception, my animal companion has always been a canine, a dog, or a wolf. This stretches back to my first ever tabletop character who was a ranger and picked up a wolf named Woofles when I got him to level 4. That's so cute, Woofles. I've always been unusually emotionally attached to my animal companions as well. One of the only 2 times I got mad at a DM was when Woofles the first was literally torn to shreds by a gug around level 9. This is also why I think it is important to have session zeros, because full disclaimer that I would also be quite upset if a GM killed off one of my dog companions. However, I always pick systems and GMs that either give the dogs plot armor or we establish that the dog is not used for combat purposes and is only used for RP. So the OP continues. Recently, Tom has been calling me out on this pattern. It started off as teasing, but then started to morph into frustrated scolding on his part. It came to a head when I started a brawler character in a game run by my best friend, in which Tom was also a player. I discovered before we leveled out of level 1 that the brawler has an archetype which allows them to pick up an animal companion. In addition to being mechanically beneficial, I also made justifications to the DM about how my character would believably bond with an outcast wolf/dog since he himself is an outcast and the DM allowed it. I don't see anything wrong with it, particularly since this is part of the playbook. I'm not quite sure if they're still talking about the Pathfinder system. Full disclaimer, I have not myself played Pathfinder, so I can't speak to the system. It is funny to me as an expert in dogs, as somebody who has professional experience in the dog industry, how some of these things go in real life. Would you be able to bond with an outcast wolf or dog, because you yourself are an outcast? That's not necessarily how things work. However, we play these games primarily for fantastical escapism, so I'm not going to yuck someone's yum when it comes to the believability of canine behavior, although that is something that I am wanting to explore in projects later this year, beginning of next, is kind of creating some accurate canine NPCs, additional supplemental material for TTRPGs that involve canines in an effort to help combat the spread of misinformation. I'm not going to say that, GMs have to portray accurate dogs or anything like that, but if people do care about realism in their games with respect to how logically a human or a humanoid would function and how realistically a canine would function, then it would make a nice addition as well, especially in this case and in others. If you're trying to create your dog as an NPC companion, I think it's worthwhile looking at realistically how do they behave. But that is off on a side tangent, and we will get back to the story. So when Tom found out about OP getting a outcast wolf dog as his player character's companion, he started out with frustratedly scolding OP, asking OP why they were yet again going with a wolf for an animal companion instead of something more interesting/different. So this guy, who's not even the GM in this game, he is a player in this game, Tom, is getting after OP for picking a dog companion. Again, I'm like, if the argument is variety, you're not even arguing always having an animal companion. We're arguing what always the specific type of animal companion. I'm very curious to hear what Tom's logic is around this. So OP started out with the usual justifications, but then when they really started to think about it, they made a connection that they had buried and forgotten about up until that point. And they continue. When I was a kid, my family got a new dog named Buddy. I was primarily responsible for feeding and walking Buddy and bonded pretty closely with him. I even had silly notions as a teenager that when I grew up, Buddy and I would go on adventures together, even though I knew he likely wouldn't last long into my adulthood. Things got really rough at home when I was nearing adulthood, and I had to do my best to get out of the house and away. However, I would still occasionally come home for emergencies, and I was only 40 minutes away. At this point, Buddy's health was declining, and I knew it, but I figured that I'd be there for him when the moment came. Then one day, my younger brother called me for something unrelated, and in the middle of the call said, "By the way, Mom and Dad had Buddy put down over the weekend. He's all buried and everything." This gutted me, because not only had I lost one of my childhood best friends, but I didn't get the chance to say goodbye properly. Years later, when I started playing tabletop, I was finally at a place emotionally where I wanted another dog, but I couldn't afford the time and money to take care of one properly. Love that responsible dog lover over there. So when I got the opportunity to take on an animal companion, I privately used it as an opportunity to have a dog, at least in some form. And ever since then, I've had Woofles at my side across multiple characters, because in my heart, and it's hard to admit this, it's like having my best friend back and going on these adventures with him. It was so sweet. Anyway, I ended up explaining this to him in a string of Facebook messages while sobbing on my end. For whatever it's worth, on his end, he did simply say that he understood and won't get on my case about Woofles anymore. TLDR, gaming friend needles me about my need for a wolf/dog animal companion with most of my characters. accidentally triggers minor emotional breakthrough/breakdown. And there's also an edit that I'll read here. Edit, thank you for everyone commenting. And to those who gave awards, it's really wonderful to see such a shared love for our animal companions, both in and out of game. Yeah, I don't understand why Tom had the need to bring it up. I mean, it's okay if someone is just curious, but people are also just allowed to like what they like when it comes to hobbies and games of this nature. Some people do like playing with magic, or they like classes or archetypes that are more combat heavy. And I just don't think we should be policing or being critical about what types of characters that players are choosing to make that they enjoy playing, within reason, if they're not harming anyone. If someone wants to be a druid every time, let them do their thing. This might be a hot take in the community, I'm not sure. And particularly with the companion animal dynamic. For some people, having a dog and loving dogs is a big part of their personality. And it does say a lot about a person as well. Like, there are things you can infer about somebody who loves dogs this much and wants dogs to be a part of their life this much. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up is when it comes to playing a variety of different characters in these games, I don't think people need to stray so far from who they are fundamentally unless they want to. These are ultimately role-playing games. It needs to be a role that you are willing to assume. And for some people, they like playing characters that are just nothing like themselves, that have different values and morality and interests, and that's totally awesome. And there are others that, their characters are quite similar to them in different ways. Uh, and that is also fine if you want to play a character that is kind of always a bookworm, always studious. I personally don't see the issue with that. That might be a hot take. Other people might disagree with me. We'll read some comments here, and this first one I'm seeing says, while that was hard, it sounds like you got a much needed realization out of it, and your friend got a new perspective. So maybe it's a good thing in the end. OP responds to that comment saying, I do agree. It was a level of catharsis that I needed. I didn't have the emotional space when I started gaming to process things properly. And a few years later, I got a dog with my girlfriend, which pushed it to the back of my mind. It took a serious bout of self-reflection to bring it back. And for his part, Tom ended up being very reasonable about it. I'm not upset with him. It's just never considered a good thing when a discussion between two players ends up with one of them crying their eyes out. LOL. Yeah. And this is why we also have session zeros, is because you want to use those safety tools in play. You want to decide on your game's rating. Potentially triggering topics should be outlined at the beginning. The GM, at the very least, should know what the different players' lines and fails are. It's important because you don't know what is going to be triggering for somebody or what is going to be just a difficult subject for them to tackle. And we need to be respectful of that. Not saying that Tom or the GM in this situation wasn't, but it's one of the reasons why I have made a conscious effort as a player where I now don't join games that don't use safety tools and don't have session zeros, fundamentally because I believe that these are prerequisites to having a good game. It is a way to understand whether or not you will enjoy playing with these group of strangers. And even if you're playing with your friends, you never know everything that's going on in somebody's life. It's another reason why I believe doing the safety tools anonymously as much as possible, especially with the lines and veils, is important as well. Say if someone was a recovering alcoholic, they might not want drinking to have a large presence in the game, and that is totally okay. Dogs due to dog death could be another thing. You just don't know what someone is struggling with. And at the end of the day, these are supposed to be fun. So we have another comment here. I feel for you, dude. A bit after my cat passed, I would play a lot of cat-like magic characters because my mother would tell me stories about Sunshine the magic cat. Her name was Sunshine. When she ran away for the first time, it turned into something my mom would tell me about when I was upset. I finally got out of making the same character over and over in high school when I met my husband. And OP responds to that comment saying, it's something I'm still not done processing, unfortunately. I will still probably keep on with the dog companions for a while, but I feel your pain. I'm happy that gaming was there for you to help you work through your grief. And that person responds saying, I'm glad it's there to help you as well. I will always love animal companions. And this was also an element of why I wanted to go down these stories today, is role-playing games can be very cathartic for a lot of people. It allows you to work through tough topics sometimes. It allows you to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And it allows you to make decisions with consequences and implications without it impacting your real life. So I think it can just be a really helpful tool for a lot of reasons. And I do know that there is a movement, a push, a potentially innovative practice where TTRPGs are being used in therapy practices for a variety of reasons to help with that process. We have another comment here. Despite the pestering that led to it, this is actually a really sweet story in a way. Animals can have such a huge impact on people, and it's really touching that you were able to go on adventures with your friend like you wanted, even if only by proxy. Thanks for sharing, OP. And OP responds to that saying, thank you for seeing the positivity in this event. I do really bond strongly with any pets I have, and thank you for not finding my wish to be corny or anything. Thank you for stopping by. Someone responds, Woofles is an adorable name and I love it. And OP responds to that saying, thank you. I fully intend to have a dog in real life named Woofles, but I am waiting until I can have a bigger dog. Currently, we have a little terrier named Patches. Okay, and I'm popping on this one because this might be a take in a different direction. This one commenter says, I'm glad I read the whole post before drawing my conclusions. I'm also glad you realized what was going on, and it seems like you and Tom are on the mend. I don't necessarily want to agree with Tom, but playing with someone who always plays the same shtick over and over again is kind of annoying. Not a huge deal in this case. Always has an animal companion is much less role hog than always plays skill jockey, but glad everything seemed to turn out well. I think this commenter is basically saying, if you're constantly playing the same archetype over and over again, this can get pretty old, which I can understand, but again, I've made my perspective clear on people should be able to play what they like. And this is why dogs and animal companions is so interesting, because there's nuance to it, right? Depends on how people view dogs. This is a relationship that a player character always has with an NPC, right? If you have a player character with a dog. What that functionally means depends on the system, the player, the GM of that particular campaign. I think that there's still a lot of variability one could have with a character just because they're a dog lover or have an animal companion. Not that it doesn't mean much, but it doesn't prevent them from having variety in the rest of their builds. But someone replies to that comment saying, but why does their choice bother you? I have friends who usually play a similar thing each time, and so long as they're having fun, it's not a big deal for me. Some of these people I've been playing with for over a decade. And that original commenter responds, it's not that it bothers me or most people really. It's just if one person plays the same or very similar character or dynamic all of the time, mine and everyone else's character interactions with that person can become stale. As several people pointed out, it's a cooperative storytelling game. If one person is always playing something very similar, then that element never changes and it limits what others can do. Your character doesn't exist in a vacuum. They impact the DM and other players, though In the same, though much less harmful, as a chaotic, stupid edgelord, rogue, always stealing everything, a player who never branches out from their core persona wears on a lot of people. I could see this. There are a reason why we have archetypes. And this perspective to me sounds like somebody who maybe only plays D&D or one of those kinds of systems. I'm just thinking a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games have playbooks that have character archetypes, which are literally like the stereotypes of, oh, the meddling kid playbook from Monster of the Week is literally like the mystery gang from Scooby-Doo. There are changes you can make to the flavor of different characters. For instance, one wizard doesn't necessarily have to look like another, but there are going to be certain components that are the same, which is why you have that class. I don't know. It's interesting. I think it just depends on how this is being played, and maybe this is more true of people who only play with the same people over and over again. Maybe if you never play with other tables, you can get stuck replaying things to the point of them becoming stale because you just don't have outside input to spark new ideas. This hasn't been my experience yet, but we shall see. We're going to read these last couple of comments here and then move on to the next story. First one is, honestly, as soon as you set up the scenario, the first thing my mind went to was Woofles was a surrogate pet, either for one that you had lost or because you couldn't own a dog at that moment. Why did the DM feel the need to harp on this? It was obvious to myself, a stranger, what was likely going on. Why push it? It's about having fun and doing things you can't do in real life. Don't be a jerk, DM. Let people have fun so long as it doesn't lessen other people's enjoyment. And I absolutely agree. And I'm going to end on this next one because it's my favorite. Someone says, man with hound is a solid narrative archetype. Yeah, and my brain immediately went to the ghoul from Fallout right now, one of my favorite shows. This user continues, I like to diversify my builds, but that's me. My buddy runs a nuclear option fighter guy in about every game, and he's got it to an art. Another friend runs caster types of varying nature, and he's gotten pretty good at them. I bet you figured out how to use animal companions expertly because specialization is a perk to itself. Yeah. And this ultimately comes down to player preferences. And I would argue it also comes down to, are you playing this game for fun? Are you doing actual plays? Are you doing this professionally? If this is just you hanging out with your friends, I really don't see why it matters whether or not you play dude with dog or not. And as people have said, it's not any different to somebody who is maybe always a caster or always the tank of the group. Sometimes people specialize in things that they're really good at because it aligns with their personality or is a form of escapism for them. If it is just a game, it's just for fun, I don't see why we yuck somebody else's yum. This next story is titled, How My Old Group Handled My Dog Dying. So recently I read a thread about how a jerky DM told the OP to unalive his sick cat, and it reminded me of an experience of my own. While my story is not as dramatic, it's still pretty bad. For a bit of context, Jay, in brackets we have worst player, was in the group at the time, but this was after the worst DM, the guy who blackmailed me in a previous story, had left. I feel like I'm missing a lot of lore. We'll continue and then see if we need to go back and read some of the other threads. Due to various reasons, such as the worst DM causing trouble, we were holding our games at the house of a player. We have 4 people involved in this story. We have the house owner, Jay, and myself. We need to start using character names instead of letters. It just makes the stories more fun to read. Like, I don't need them to be the real names, but let's talk about, I don't know, Minnie Mouse and Aragorn and Aslan. Now I'm just being silly, but anyways. So like every other night we run, I arrive to the session and sit down only to get a phone call from my mum, who's in tears. Our old dog, 12 at the time, has collapsed during a walk, and she's taken him to the vet, where the verdict is that he's going to be put down. Now, I'm quite a ways away, but my mom talked to the vet into waiting to see if I could get there. But given that Toffee, I think Toffee's the name of their dog, Toffee is in a lot of pain, the vet won't wait forever. As I learned from this experience, vets take some kind of Hippocratic oath, similar to doctors that operate on humans, where they won't put a healthy animal down, but they also won't let an animal suffer. Yeah, that was the thing. If I was OP, I'm rushing over there, but also if I'm going to take too long or if the vet recommends it, I would have told my parent to euthanize my pup because I just don't want them to suffer. But I also know that people deal with grief differently. Needless to say, like any other pet owner, I didn't take the news very well. And on top of things, I don't have the means of getting there in time to say goodbye. I managed to come to my senses and ordered a taxi, of course, but there was a wait time. Those 15 minutes waiting for a taxi, I can describe as hell on earth. I'm pacing back and forth, crying a lot. And how does the party react? Thought this was going to be a nice story from the title, but maybe not. So Jay smiles and comments on how this is just like a movie. Weirdly enough, for once, he wasn't the worst person in the room for a change, but that's still a bit of a jerk move. I would agree, and I'm going to save my comments because I think it gets worse from here. The homeowner actually laughs, and not a nervous laugh because it's a bit of a strange thing to see. No, I mean full on belly laughing. At first I spin around ready to yell at him or something, and he mentions it's because he had read something on the back of my t-shirt. I mean, I get it. It's a fun t-shirt with a Star Wars reference, but dude, can you hold it in for like even 5 minutes? Neither of these people are asking how I'm doing, offer any kind of support despite me both crying and having a panic attack over the wait for the taxi. R was the only person to ask if I was okay, but I obviously wasn't. Outside of that, not much else. I'm just going to scroll up to the top because these people do not sound like OP's friends. I'm curious if this was like a friend group or a bunch of strangers that got together because they wanted to participate in this hobby together. But then they're at like somebody's house, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm not going to somebody's house if they're not my friend or family, especially by myself to play a role-playing game. I don't know. Just if someone from the internet or something offers for me to go to their house to play Risk, I am just less likely to do it if I don't know them. You know what I mean? So I imagine they must have been friends, but again, I don't have the context. But if OP considers these people to be their friends, I really hope that they dump them because this is not okay. OP continues with, now I get it. There's not really much somebody could do in that situation. I'm pacing around the room, sobbing violently while undergoing a panic attack for about 15 minutes, but still, there's a right way and a wrong way to handle it. The homeowner was the worst. I mean, laughing? Screw you. That's just really callous. I just don't understand. Opie continues, I got there in time and the taxi driver was kind and understanding. Pretty sure that he broke near the speed limit a few times in an attempt to get me there. So thank you, random taxi driver. It's due to him not being a jerk in this situation that I got to say goodbye to my best friend of 12 years. I'm not friends with those people anymore. Yeah. In fact, I was never really friends with R to begin with for other reasons. There was one other person in my group at the time, but she was late to the session, so missed all of this. I texted her about the situation, and although she offered condolences when I texted her to say he was gone because she was a friend of mine at the time, she didn't really check up on me in the coming weeks or ask how I was when I missed multiple sessions in a row. Yeah. There's also something to be said where sometimes people are your friends in a particular context, which is what this sounds like, where we're friends, but more so long-standing acquaintances that are friendly because we engage in the same hobby or activity, but aren't actually friends. But let's read some comments. The comments are essentially just offering their condolences. Someone mentions that, sometimes that's a nervous tick of people laugh when they're nervous. But OP does clarify that Jay is a butthole that they've posted about in at least 2 stories on this sub. He is a repeat offender of being inappropriate on purpose. Yeah, these just sound like people I would not want to game with or go to their house. You know, I'm like, no D&D is better than bad D&D. Especially if these people are injecting negativity and chaos into your life during a time where you're grieving over your dying dog. We need more kindness in the world. We're going to roll into the third story, which is titled DM was obsessed with killing my character's dog. In real life, I had a dog named Lauren. I loved her so much that when I tried D&D a few years ago, I asked the DM if my character, who was a cleric, could get a dog in-game. He agreed, but made some reasonable caveats. I had to have the money to buy the dog, for example. Okay, so already doing the right thing. So the player asked if they could have a dog. The DM agreed to this request. We talked about it prior to the game's start. This is how things are supposed to be handled. So I don't know how we get to the story headline, and I'm a little scared. OP says that, if they got the dog, they named her Lauren after their dog in real life. But then I noticed something. Basically, randomly, the DM would just have monsters or people attack Lauren. I would protest because these always happen to uninitiated. Basically, that means that they're playing D&D. Normally, what happens is you enter initiative order when you're getting into combat. So when you're just walking around doing your questing thing, talking to shopkeepers and the like, you're not in combat, you're not in fighting mode. So it's weird when the party wasn't in conflict for this DM to just be like, hey, this random goblin fires an arrow at your dog. It's just very DM causes a rock slide that kills everybody and results, in a TPK. It's just weird behavior. It eventually turned into the DM just always targeting my player for all the attacks, even though we had a tank, and then targeting my dog. The last straw came out of nowhere when he decided to just kill Lauren by having multiple monsters attack us at camp and head straight for her. In brackets, because the monsters were hungry. I protested, and so did the other players. Yeah, because that's a jerk move. So the DM begrudgingly retconned my dog dying. Then the next weekend, Lauren in real life had to be put down due to old age. I decided that I really didn't have the emotional energy to argue with this dude over killing my fictional dog again, and so I stopped going. And ultimately, I stopped playing D&D, so F you, Jason. Screw you, Jason. You're a jerk. I am very sorry to OP. They're never going to see this, but I'm really, really hoping this post came out 4 years ago. I hope that they found a new D&D group or tried a different TTRPG system. It really makes such a difference finding good GMs and good players to play with. This is just super unreasonable. Part of session 0 is also just figuring out which GMs are on an ego trip and then consciously deciding to not play at their tables. So yeah, another RPG horror story. But again, this red flag wouldn't have even come up because, the player asked the GM about the dog. The GM didn't have any qualms with it. But that's why you do the safety tools. Because a lot of people will just do session 0 for character creation and not implement safety tools or have a rating for the game or talk about the themes and potential triggers and the like. Why that's important is because on the Lines and Veils document, you would have like a harm to animals tab or things like that where you could specify the please don't kill my dog. And then the GM might have a discussion with you of, okay, well, if you want no harm to come to your dog, then your dog can't be allowed in combat. If it's just for RP purposes, then the dog can have plot armor, etc., etc. Somebody commented on OP's post saying, I forced my player to change his wolf companion's name because it was the same as his real life dog. Yeah, I would also say none of my characters' dogs are the same name as my dogs, and normally not even the same breed or anything like that. The fictional dog and my real life dogs are not the same, so I wouldn't want to name them the same things because I think that's when things can get really blurry and it can lead into bleed, where you're still having the emotions in game in your real life and vice versa. And I just think it would be better keep that separate. But that is, OP and their GM's decision. This commenter continues, I'll treat the wolf companion like any other character. I'm a bit worried about it as they want to use it as a tank. All the characters are ranged. I've had to make it clear that he may die, and another character has a pet mouse, which I'm happy to give plot armor as he stays in a pocket and doesn't join in with combat. Yeah, exactly. And then I think that is so valid. The GM was like, hey, you can have this wolf, this like doggy-like character. However, if they're in combat, they might get hurt, they might die. And the little mouse who, isn't doing the combat thing has plot armor. That to me seems super reasonable. That makes a lot of sense. And I wish my DM had communicated with me better about that. As it was, my dog was very small, so I never intended to have her in combat. She was purely for some flavor. Yeah, so again, then I think that dog should have had plot armor. Someone responds to that saying, if someone just wanted a non-combat pet, I just ignore it in combat. Yeah, and that is the deal I strike with all of my GMs. Let Fido go hide over there. If you kill off my character, fine and good. Just make sure the dog survives. Someone says, pigging on a pet that doesn't even participate in combat is just mean. I personally don't touch player pets in any kind of lethal manner unless they're using it in combat. Maybe I'll just get spooked when a troll shows up so the player will have to spend a minute looking for them after the fight. But a bunch of monsters aren't going to just attack the poor thing out of the blue at my table. I don't want to kill someone's cat or dog. Heck, I don't even like to kill the ranger's pet bear. At least they have a way to bring the bear back, though. And the OP responds to that saying, bears can run at 30 miles per hour. That ranger's going to have a long trip. Someone responds, pets in my game are off limits combat-wise. Unless your pet is a familiar, beast companion, or mount, the unspoken rule is that when initiative is rolled, the pet runs away from the fight and returns once the fight is over. Someone responds to that saying, my players always joked because their pet rat survived fireballs, poison clouds, and a Medusa, and it always came out unharmed, lol. Which makes sense, as unless an animal is specifically trained for combat, that's probably what they would do. Now we're going to roll into the last story of today, which is titled Murder Hobo Bard Kills Puppies. Not off to a promising start. Sounds like some Cruella de Vil stuff, but we shall see. So they have a content warning at the beginning of the story, animal abuse and murder. Okay, so I'm 19 male and a kind of new DM, and this happened about a year ago. It was my first campaign to really go anywhere and my first D&D 5e campaign, 5th edition. I was playing with a group of friends. The only characters you need to know are my fighter character, the goblin rogue, the bard, and a dwarf. I had played with most of the people before, and I had been playing as a player with most of the group for probably 6 to 8 months at that point. The player who plays the bard is not a bad person, like at all. He's super nice in real life, but his character was kind of a butthole. So we're in a town that we had just saved from werewolves, and we came back only to have our rogue get arrested for trying to rob a jewelry store and being a goblin. So then the party has to get him out, and the party goes off to come up with a plan. The bard did not join us and just went to the bar. Eventually, the dwarf went in there too and gets upset for various reasons in character. The dwarf starts to cry, and this annoys other drunk patrons. The bard comes over and starts to comfort the dwarf. A drunk guy comes over and starts to yell at them. To his credit, the bard doesn't kill the guy, he just puts him to sleep using magic. The bartender asks them to leave. This is where things go bad. So the bard doesn't want to leave, but eventually the bartender stops asking and pulls a handheld crossbow out from under the bar. As the dwarf leaves, the bard doesn't. Bartender shoots once, bard viciously mocks the guy. Bartender is alive, and 2 less drunk patrons join the fight against the bard. We were new to this town, and it was a small community. Bard kills one of the men before the guards arrive, and he's arrested. It turned out later that this was his plan the whole time. And now he's in jail with the rogue. The party breaks into the jail unseen, for the most part, but that's a different story, probably not for the sub, and we bust them out. After they're free, the bard wants revenge. So does the rogue. The rogue wants to kill the owner of the store, and the bard wants to kill everyone. My fighter and the other player start arguing with the bard. I'll admit I took it too far and lost my cool a bit, and the bard leaves for the rest of the session, which ends shortly later. Take it too far? What does that mean? Another reason for the safety tools being in place, being able to have the X and O cards in this situation and to stop and make sure that, just because the characters are having conflict, it doesn't mean that the players are necessarily having conflict. But OP does clarify that they apologize out of game to the player. The party flees the town to go on more adventures, and we forget the whole killing a guy thing. That is until the bard did something unforgivable, which I believe leads us to the story title. So the party is in the biggest city in the world, and they want to go shopping. The bard and the rogue go to look for somewhere to get a dog for the very small goblin to ride. Cute. This reminds me of frequently corgis as a breed are depicted in various, I think, Celtic folklore. I don't know if it's Irish or Welsh specific. I know that it is Celtic, as mounts for fairies. So you'll see in art these little corky dogs with saddles and fairies riding them. So when the story mentioned having a mount for the little goblin, that's what popped into my head. So the party finds a shop and they start to talk to the owner, who is a very, very, very big guy. And I tell them as such. He's hesitant to sell a dog to the party because he's concerned for its well-being. And the bard says something along the lines of, "I'll kill your dogs," under his breath. I ask the bard to roll a stealth check, and he beats the guy's perception slightly. So the guy heard him say something and asks him what he said. The bard could have said it was unrelated, but he didn't. The bard got angry and instead yelled that he'd killed the store owner and his dogs. We don't like playing with murder hobos. It's not justified vindication if you're just picking fights with people. So obviously the store owner didn't like this and punched him. The rogue knows what's going to go down and books it. They fight and the dogs are contained in some cages at the back of the shop. The bard uses an area of effect spell and it ends up hitting the dogs and it does a lot more damage. It killed most of the dogs, which makes the guy really mad. The bard gets thrown outside and again casts the same spell at the same point, which kills the last of the dogs. The bard ends up losing the fight and the shop owner kills himself and the bard is once again arrested. I'm just going to put this out here right now. I am way too vengeful for this. If I was the GM, I would have, that character would have been gone. There would not have been a bard there to get arrested. So the OP continues, we didn't bust him out. He eventually was tried and found guilty on 51 counts of property damage, destruction, and had to pay a massive fine or never return to the city. The GM! That guy was let off too easily. That character should have been left to rot in jail. He then leaves the jail and we continue on to do the job we were buying stuff for. Eventually, me and the player of the bard talk, and we agree to kill off the bard, and he joins as a half-orc fighter who is just as chaotic, maybe more so, as the bard, but is the kindest soul you could ever meet. That player left the campaign because he had to start a job and didn't have the time for D&D. That campaign is still going and everyone in it says that they are having a good time. TLDR, nice player's a-hole character kills a bunch of dogs out of negligence. I think the GM let the player get away with too much, but that's just my opinion. Let's read some comments. So our first comment here, chaotic doesn't have to mean that you kill people or dogs indiscriminately. It's always so obnoxious when that's a player's idea of fun, because it almost always causes problems for the party. It also raises the question of why the party would agree to work and travel with someone who seems so unhinged. Yeah, unless they're just as murder crazy as the chaotic butthole, they probably wouldn't want to spend much time with that person. Yeah, I am of a similar mindset. You wouldn't want to hang out with someone in real life as like this. It's a fictional setting. Why would your character want to hang out with a character like this? I don't know. So the OP responds to that comment saying, his character was less so his idea of fun, but total apathy to everything around him. He played his character well. He consistently stayed in character, even if he personally didn't want to do something. And for that, I respect the character. The dog killing was less intentional and more a product of the character not caring, but it still put a divide between him and the rest of the party that never healed, and that's why we agreed to make him a new character who fit right in until he had to leave. Someone in response to that saying that fact that he, in quotations, played his character well is BS. He could have played his character differently, which would have been better. This character is defined through roleplay, not vice versa. Playing a bad character, well, is playing badly, period. Alrighty, and that is it for our stories today. Yeah, and I think it tells you a lot about the kind of experience. I think it tells you a lot about the kind of experience you're going to have when playing with people who make decisions for their characters like this. I'm not saying that this reflects on what they think in real life. For myself, if I have the power to be in this fantastical realm, my player characters are like fighting injustices and getting money and assets and going on cool adventures and things. I am not going on a killing spree. That's just not fun for me. It's not my idea of fun. And so I think this goes back to setting the tone and the vibe of a particular table in session 0 before you embark on a long campaign with these people and characters. Let me know in the comments if you give your dogs plot armor. Do you give your player characters plot? I can definitely see why some of these stories ended up on the RPG Horror Story subreddit. A lot of the characters that came up in these stories are just not folks that I would enjoy having at my table. As a bit of a palate cleanser and a pick-me-up after that last story, I would encourage everyone to comment below their favorite story about having an animal companion in a TTRPG campaign. Why was it your favorite? Dog or no? Let's just hear some fun animal stories in game. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one.